Nathaniel Bishop had built Bishop Global Enterprises from a single struggling logistics company into a sprawling international conglomerate worth billions, employing over 60,000 people across 5 continents. And yet, despite every success, every acquisition, every glowing profile in business magazines calling him a visionary, he had grown deeply uneasy over the past year about the culture within his own company. Hearing whispers from a few trusted old friends, still working the warehouse floors, that something had shifted since the last corporate restructuring, that the values he had built the company on, respect, humility, taking care of your people, seemed to be eroding under the new wave of executives he had hired to scale the business faster. Executives who talked a good game in boardrooms, but whom he suspected treated employees very differently when they thought no one important was watching. And so when his annual company holiday party rolled around, an enormous gala held at the Bishop Global headquarters with catered food, an open bar, live music, and nearly 2,000 employees from every department in attendance, Nathaniel made a decision that stunned even his most loyal assistant, Diane, who had worked beside him for over 15 years. He would not attend as himself. He would slip into the party disguised as a homeless man who had wandered in from the cold, wearing a tattered coat he had purchased from a thrift store, scuffed boots, a scraggly fake beard applied with careful makeup work from a theatrical friend, dirt smudged carefully onto his hands and face, and a shopping cart with a few bags of collected cans, planning to shuffle through the edges of the party, maybe near the catering entrance or the parking lot. Just close enough to observe how his employees treated someone they perceived as beneath them, someone with nothing to offer, no power, no money, no professional value in their eyes, because he believed, perhaps naively, that if there was rot within his company culture, it would reveal itself most honestly in how people treated a stranger who could do nothing for their careers. And so on the night of the party, as elegant cars pulled up to the glass-fronted headquarters and employees in cocktail dresses and tailored suits flowed inside laughing and chatting about year-end bonuses, Nathaniel positioned himself near a side entrance close to the loading dock, hunched over, moving slowly, mumbling softly to himself the way he had observed unhoused individuals do near his old warehouse decades ago when he was just starting out, and slept in his car more nights than he cared to admit. And the first interaction came quickly and painfully. 3 junior executives from the marketing department, sharp suits, expensive watches, stepping out for a smoke break, spotting him near the dumpsters and immediately recoiling, one of them snapping, "Hey, you can't be back here, this is private property." Another muttering something under his breath about calling security, not one of them pausing to ask if he was okay, if he needed anything. Simply treating him as an inconvenience to be removed rather than a human being to be acknowledged. And Nathaniel felt a heavy weight settle into his chest, not because he was hurt personally, his disguise long forgotten in that moment, but because he recognized in their dismissiveness an attitude he feared was becoming common throughout his company's culture under the new leadership he had installed. And as the night wore on, he encountered more of the same. A group of finance department employees walking past him without even glancing his way. A woman in a stunning red dress wrinkling her nose and stepping to the far side of the sidewalk, as if his presence alone might contaminate her evening. And worst of all, one of his own senior vice presidents, a man named Gregory Fenn, who Nathaniel had personally promoted 3 years earlier, believing him to be a rising star of integrity, walking out to his car. Spotting Nathaniel rummaging through a nearby trash can for cans, and instead of ignoring him or walking past, actually stopping to sneer, "Get away from the cars before I call the cops on you. We don't need your kind hanging around here scaring the clients." The casual cruelty in his voice cutting deeper than Nathaniel expected, confirming his worst fears about the culture shift within his own leadership team, and just as he was beginning to lose hope. Feeling the disguise less like an experiment, and more like a genuine window into a callousness he hadn't fully appreciated existed within his empire, a young woman stepped out from the side door near the kitchen entrance, wearing a simple black uniform that marked her as part of the catering staff rather than a salaried employee, her name tag reading, Sophia. Her dark curly hair pulled back beneath a hairnet, carrying a small bag of leftover food she had clearly been about to throw away. And instead of walking past Nathaniel or reacting with disgust, she paused, looked directly at him and asked gently, "Sir, are you doing okay out here?" "It's pretty cold tonight," her voice carrying genuine concern rather than pity or performative kindness. And when Nathaniel, staying in character, mumbled something about just looking for a warm place to rest for a bit, Sophia didn't hesitate. She held out the bag of food, warm rolls and some leftover catering trays that would have otherwise been discarded, and said, "Here, please take this, and there's a shelter 2 blocks from here on 5th that has decent beds if you need somewhere warmer tonight." I used to volunteer there before I picked up this job. And then, noticing his hands trembling slightly from the cold, an unscripted detail Nathaniel hadn't even planned as part of his disguise, simply the cold December air affecting him. Sophia unwrapped the scarf from around her own neck and offered it to him without a moment's hesitation, saying, "Take this too, I've got a jacket, you need it more than me right now." And Nathaniel, completely unprepared for this level of genuine, unprompted kindness from someone who clearly had very little herself, working what he would later learn was a physically demanding catering job for barely above minimum wage, while attending community college part-time to become a social worker, found himself momentarily speechless, the weight of gratitude and shame mixing together in his chest. Shame that it had taken a person with the least power and the least resources in his entire company to demonstrate the values he had spent 30 years trying to instill in his organization. And as Sophia turned to head back inside, worried she had already stayed away from her station too long, Nathaniel asked her, still in character, why she bothered helping a stranger who could do nothing for her in return, and she simply shrugged and said, "Everyone deserves kindness, especially when things are hard. My family didn't have much growing up and people helped us when we needed it most, so I just try to pass that forward whenever I can." Before hurrying back inside to finish her shift, leaving Nathaniel standing alone in the cold parking lot, deeply moved and profoundly troubled by everything he had witnessed that night. And rather than immediately revealing his identity, he decided to observe a little longer, wanting to understand the full scope of what was happening within his company. So over the following 2 weeks, still occasionally donning his disguise during off hours near various company locations, he continued to quietly investigate, discovering through careful, low-key conversations with warehouse workers, security guards, and lower-level staff that Gregory Fenn's dismissive attitude wasn't an isolated incident, but reflective of a broader pattern of behavior he had cultivated within his department. Employees confiding that Fenn regularly belittled support staff, took credit for his team's ideas, and had created a culture of fear rather than collaboration, explaining why turnover in his department had quietly spiked over the past year without triggering the kind of alarm bells it should have at the executive level. And Nathaniel also learned more about Sophia, discovering she had been working with the catering company that Bishop Global contracted for over a year, consistently praised by her supervisors for her work ethic and kindness, supporting her younger siblings after their parents had immigrated with very little and struggled to find stable work, all while maintaining a part-time course load in social work, determined to eventually give back to communities like the one that had helped her family when they first arrived in the country. And the more Nathaniel learned about her character, the more convinced he became that people like Sophia represented exactly the kind of values he wanted his company to embody. Values that had somehow been buried under layers of corporate ambition and profit-driven executive hires who had lost sight of what truly made an organization strong. So he made a decision, calling an emergency meeting with his board of directors and human resources department, revealing the full truth of his disguised experiment, presenting the recorded observations, documented employee testimonies, and clear patterns of behavior he had uncovered. Initiating a full internal review that ultimately led to Gregory Fenn's termination after multiple corroborated accounts of workplace mistreatment came to light during the investigation, along with several other leadership changes across departments where similar patterns of disrespect towards support staff and lower-level employees had been allowed to fester unchecked. And simultaneously, Nathaniel launched a company-wide culture initiative, personally overseeing new training programs focused on respect and dignity for every employee regardless of position, from executives to janitorial staff to catering contractors, implementing anonymous feedback systems that specifically tracked how leadership treated support staff, and creating a mentorship program designed to identify and promote employees who genuinely embodied the company's core values rather than simply those who delivered impressive quarterly numbers. And then, weeks after the party, Nathaniel personally reached out to Sophia, inviting her to his office, and when she arrived, confused and slightly nervous about why the CEO of the company that contracted her employer wanted to meet with her, Nathaniel revealed the truth. That the homeless man she had shown kindness to in the parking lot that cold December night had been him in disguise, watching how his own company's culture had decayed, and that her simple act of offering food and her own scarf to a stranger had ultimately been the catalyst for major changes throughout his entire organization. And Sophia, stunned into silence for a long moment, eventually admitted she had no regrets about her actions, that she would have done the same thing regardless of who he really was. Because that was simply the way she believed people should treat each other, and moved deeply by her humility and consistency of character, Nathaniel offered her something she never expected, not a simple reward or bonus, but a fully funded scholarship to complete her social work degree along with a newly created position within Bishop Global's philanthropic foundation. A role specifically designed to help the company build genuine community outreach programs and identify other individuals like herself who understood the true meaning of service and compassion. A job that would allow her to use her education and her natural empathy to make a tangible difference in people's lives, while providing her and her family the financial stability they had never quite been able to achieve. And Sophia, overwhelmed with gratitude but still carrying the same humble spirit that had defined her actions that cold December night, accepted the position, determined to use this unexpected opportunity to continue helping others exactly as she always had. And over the following months, as Bishop Global's cultural transformation began taking root throughout the organization, employee satisfaction scores climbing, turnover decreasing, and a renewed sense of purpose spreading through departments that had grown cynical under the previous leadership style, Nathaniel made it a personal mission to regularly check in with employees at every level. No longer content to rely solely on filtered reports from senior executives, occasionally even returning to his old disguise on quiet afternoons, just to keep himself honest and grounded. Reminding himself never again to lose touch with the everyday realities of the people who made his company function. And Sophia's story spread quietly throughout the organization, not as corporate propaganda, but as an authentic reminder to every employee that kindness and integrity mattered more than titles or paychecks, inspiring a wave of small acts of generosity and respect throughout the company culture that Nathaniel had feared was permanently lost. And in the end, at the following year's holiday party, held once again at Bishop Global headquarters, Nathaniel stood before his employees, not in disguise this time but as himself, sharing publicly for the first time the full story of what he had witnessed that cold December night the year before, honoring Sophia's kindness in front of the entire company as a living example of the values he hoped every person in the organization would strive to embody, watching as she stood modestly near the back of the room. Uncomfortable with the attention, but quietly proud of the ripple effect her simple act of compassion had created throughout an entire corporation. And as the video fades to black over the warmly lit celebration, a soft reminder appears on screen for viewers. True leadership isn't measured by how you treat those who can benefit you, but by how you treat those who seemingly have nothing to offer in return. So if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that genuine kindness always leaves the world a little better than it found it.